Hello everybody, it's Tom Seidner, and in this video I am going to attempt to explain how I created my digital to analog box for my Carrera digital set that allows me to run analog cars on the digital track. Now first of all, I did this on my own. I saw that there were some boxes out there. I watched, the video of people installing them. I didn't have any intricate knowledge of what's inside their box, but I saw how they hooked them up, and through watching that I was able to kind of glean a little bit of information. In fact, enough information to figure out how to do this on my own. I did not receive any information of anybody else's box when I made this. I was kind of in the dark on it, and I just kind of muddled through based on what I thought would happen, experimenting. I was equipped with the knowledge that I may destroy my Carrera box by experimenting around with it. I knew 100% I was voiding the warranty, but I had bought several sets, and so I had a couple other control boxes that came with my other sets. So I figured if I destroyed my control box, the main brain of my Carrera digital set, that I had another one, and then I would just chuck the idea and move on. But it worked out. I was able to make it work. It works really good. I was a little nervous about some of the digital components, but now I've logged probably a good 300 hours of running things on there, and with no issues at all for my switch lanes or anything like that. So I really hesitated to make this video for a long time because I don't want to encourage people experimenting around on their digital track if they if they're not under the understanding that they could destroy it. They could easily destroy it. So I just want to make this disclaimer before we go any farther, that this will 100% void the warranty on your Carrera control unit. So if you're going to do this with that knowledge. Also, anything you see in this video is stuff that I've experimented and came up with myself. So if you attempt to do any of these things and you destroy your Carrera head unit, I am not responsible for replacing or fixing your head unit. You do this kind of modification at your own risk. That being said, I'm going to attempt to go through and show you what I did and how I made mine work. Now, when I made this box, this was very early in my hobby, and I didn't know a lot. I'd never met Marty Ford. I'd never met Dave, Slot R Dave. They have helped me tremendously through my journey in the slot car thing, but I didn't even know who those guys were when I made this box. Now, subsequently, both of those guys have made videos about an analog or about a digital to analog box that they have created, or they've made. I think Marty created it. I think Dave used Marty's design and did some improvement on that. Now my box is not like their box. So I've watched both of their videos, and from what I can tell, their box uses separate power for the analog and the digital. Also, their boxes allow you to use third-party analog controllers for their setup. Now, the one thing when I made mine was that one of the caveats to my conversion was that I did not want to have to purchase separate controllers or a power supply for my track to be able to run analog. So with that in mind, that's how I developed my box. And so if you want to know what the difference is between my box and Marty's box and Dave's box, then that is the big difference. My box uses the standard Carrera controllers, the same controllers that you use on the digital side, you use on the analog side. So I am using my wireless controllers that came with my sets to run my analog cars. Also, I am using the power supply in the control unit to power both the Carrera side, the digital side, and the analog side, the non-digital side. So just keep that in mind when you do this. If you're watching this video and you say to yourself, I want to have a large power supply for my analog side that I can control the voltage and all that stuff. Mine doesn't do that. You'll need to go watch Marty's video or Dave's video. They're both great videos, and I highly recommend both those guys. Those guys they're very smart guys, and their boxes are just a little bit different than mine. In fact, if their box was identical to mine, I probably wouldn't even make this video. But I'm only making this just to kind of highlight the differences between my box and their box. So that being said, a lot of this video I'm going to do from my computer, not from this camera here. So I'm going to move to my computer and do the rest of this video. There's going to be a lot of pictures and images and me talking over it, because if I showed you a video of what it looked like inside my box, you wouldn't be able to see much, because it's just a mess of wires and chips and everything in there, and it's not going to show you what's going on. So I'm going to attempt the best I can to show you some diagrams. I'm going to show you the original diagram that I used when I sat down and designed this in my head and I put it on paper. And then I'm going to show you some diagrams of some chips and stuff like that, and kind of explain how mine's working and give you an idea of how you could do this yourself if you want. But like I said, you do this at your own risk. You are responsible. You know, if you break your track or your control unit or tear up your cars or anything like that, please keep that in mind. Otherwise, let's go to the computer and let's take a look at how I made this digital to analog conversion box. So I guess the best place to start with this is to take a look at the outside of the box. So here's a picture of the outside of my box. I apologize, it's so dusty. I didn't realize it was so dusty, but the camera picked that up when I flashed it. So, but anyway, nevertheless, let's go through the components that you can see on here. There's some components inside that you can't see, but let's go through the components that you can see. So first of all, we've got this switch. It's my analog to digital switch. Now this analog to digital switch is an on-off-on switch. So it has three modes. It has when it's in the top mode, it's running the analog information through there. And when it's in the middle mode, it's doing nothing. It's completely off. And when it's in the down mode, it's running the digital information through it. Now this switch has three sets of 4 connectors on it, and those connectors pass through to each other. So there are 4 connectors here, and as you can see, these 3 pass through, these 3 pass through, these 3 pass through, and these 3 pass through. So what happens is the 4 connectors in the middle that you see here, those connectors are what go to the track. And then, so that's pretty much the output connectors. And then these connectors, these 4 connectors here, are 4 connectors that have input, and the other 4 connectors, these 4 connectors here, also have input. And so depending on where the switch is, either the input from these 4 connectors are going to be going to the center connectors, or the input from these 4 connectors are going to go to the center connector. So it's going to pass through either what's coming from these pins or what's coming from these pins through to the middle pins. So we also have a couple standard LEDs here. I set up my track so that I had a blue lane and a red lane. So I have some LEDs that represent the lanes. These are just standard LEDs, nothing fancy. I also have 2 switches here, push button switches. These are momentary switches, and these are special switches. Now, the standard switch that you buy is going to be a switch that is open, and then you press it to close it. So you're going to have no connectivity through that switch, and then when you press the switch, it's going to make a connection, and it's going to send power through it. These are the opposite of that. These are special switches that have power going through them all the time, and then when you press the button, it kills the power. So when you get these switches, make sure you get the correct switches. I'm going to put here on the screen a picture of the switches I purchased from Amazon, and you're going to notice these are normally closed switches. They're normally closed so that the circuit is working, and then when you push them,
the circuit opens and they don't work anymore. And that's very important, because what you're wanting to do is you're wanting to stop power going to a chip, not give power to a chip when you push the button. Because what's going to happen is when you push this button here, the blue lane button, it's going to turn off power to the red lane chip. And the reason it does that is going to allow you to program the blue chip without the red lane. Because it's just like if you have a car on the track and you go to digitally program the car, it's going to program that car and any other car that's on the track when you're doing the programming. So you only want the one car on the track when you're doing the programming. So this simulates that. This button will take the red lane out of the calculation so that it's not there, so you can program the blue lane alone. And the same thing happens here. If you push this button on the red side, it's going to disable power to the blue side so that you can program the red side, and it'll seem like this one's completely gone. So the only other thing on this box is this analog power switch. All this does is turns off power to these chips. So I didn't think it would be a good idea to leave power to these chips if you weren't running, digital, or you weren't running, your cars at the current time. So this just allows me to turn off power to these chips in a hope that this will help to add to the longevity of the life of the chips that I have in this box. Now, before we move any further, let's talk about exactly what this box does. So what this box does, it simulates a digital car being on the track. After I made this, I didn't know anything about this, but after I made this box and got it working, I found some videos about similar stuff, and I learned that it's called chipping the lane. So actually what we're doing in my box is we're adding a chip to the lane, a digital chip. Instead of adding an individual chip to the car, to each and every car, we are adding a chip to the lane itself. Now, in this box, I used the Carrera 124 digital chips. I think they can handle a little more power. I thought the longevity of them would be better than the 132 chips, so I did use the 124 chips. Those are readily available. You can buy them online. I think I got mine from Carrera Slots, but you can get them just about anywhere. And I highly recommend you use the 124 chips. They're rated for more power than the 132, so if you do something silly, it may be able to handle it, whereas the 132s just seem a little more fragile to me. Okay, so the next thing we need to talk about is this Carrera chip. Like I said, it's a Carrera chip out of a digital 124 car, and it has 4 sets of leads on it. This purple and gray set, that is normally the line that goes to the motor. The red and the black set here are the lines that normally go to the pickups on the car. And then you've got your yellow and green set, which usually go to the front lights on the car. And you've got your orange and white set here that go to the rear lights of the car. Now what we're going to do is we're going to utilize these within our box. So let's talk about how this is going to work. And so what we're going to actually do is we're going to actually attach this red and black wire to the power of the control unit. So this is going to have digital power from the control unit going directly to it. Now, like I said, I have an on-off switch in my box to disable this. So what I've done is I've run this red wire, I've cut this red wire, and I've run this red wire to the on-off switch. And that will eliminate power to this chip when I'm not using the chip, when I'm not in analog mode, when I'm, when I don't want to, when I'm doing something else and I just want to eliminate power going to this, so that it just kind of for the longevity of the chip. So we're going to run the black wire to the ground of the control unit, and then the red wire is going to be split, and it's going to go to the on-off switch, and then from the on-off switch it's going to go to the positive output of the control unit. And then these gray and purple wire here, these are going to go to the analog digital switch. So they are going to go to the analog side of the analog digital switch, so that when the switch is in that position, it will send these through to the track. And you're going to have 2 of these chips in your box. So one of the chips is going to go to one lane, and one of the chips is going to go to the other lane, and that's how you're going to send power to your cars. Now, this chip is going to interpret the digital signal that comes in, and then it's just going to send an output voltage to these lines here, so that it tells the car how fast to go. Now, the yellow and green leads here are going to go to your LED light. If this is the chip for the blue lane, then these 2 are going to go to the blue light. Or if it's a chip for the red lane, it's going to go to the red light. Or if you want to have different colors in your track, that's perfectly fine. But this is going to go to the LED. And then the other lead, the orange and white, it's not without a use. What I did, because the yellow and green lead is a female and the orange and white is a male, I went ahead and unsoldered the orange and white from this board because you don't need them for the box to work. And then I soldered this to the LED so that I could disconnect this chip if I needed to, in order to get it out of there in case the chip went bad or something like that. I didn't have to like completely solder it on. I did also buy some connectors for these so that I could actually connect these in the board. So within my case, all of these are actually plugged in so that the chip can be replaced fairly simply without having to do any soldering or anything like that. So if you need a very tiny connector, you can unsolder like I did this rear light and use this wire to go to your LED. Now here I'll put a little graphic on here just to kind of show you how this chip is connected within the box. And I'll give you a second to look at it. Okay, so one thing I want you to note on this diagram is that when we're running to run digital, we are going to run the lines directly from the board to the switch. But when we do, we have to run the positives on the inside and the negatives on the outside, so that whenever the power comes through to the rails, it's going to be a reverse polarity to what the analog is. If you notice, the analog has got the negatives on the inside and the positives on the outside, and then those are just going to pass through to the rails, and that's going to pass through just like that. But when we hook up the digital, as you can see here, we reverse them so that when they go to the rails, we've got the positives on the underside rail and the negatives on the upper side rails when we're running in digital. One thing that's important to test once you have this all hooked up before you ever run a car on here is test your polarities on your lanes. So this diagram shows you that the analog needs to have the positive on the top rails and the negative on the bottom rails, and the digital needs to have the positive on the bottom rail and the negative on the top rail. So you'll want to use a multimeter, and you'll want to switch your box between digital and analog, and you'll want to make sure that the polarities switch, for one thing, and that the polarities are in the correct location. Okay, so the last thing I'd like to do in this video is discuss this schematic that I made for myself when I was building my converter box. And I'm just going to go over everything in here, and you guys can look at the schematic, and you can maybe get a better idea of how everything goes. So I'm going to go through what everything in here is. So first of all, this right here, this area right here is the switch, the on-off on switch. And these middle sections here are the output, and then this is the input from the digital input, and this is the input from the chips for the analog side. And you can see that I'm running the negative to the middle and the positives on the outside. And then when I have them going from the output, I have the same. I have the positive going to this rail and this positive going to this rail. This would be correct for digital. And then I have it reversed for the analog because I want it to end up reversed when it gets to the rails. So either way you do it, just make sure that your digital inputs and your analog inputs are reversed, and then make sure that your outputs are going to the right lanes here, and you can use this diagram to help you with that. Also, I want to note that these are the accessory ports here. that are on the control unit that come out the back. This is where you could plug in your rechargeable controllers, your wireless controllers. You do not want these to be hooked to the rails. So currently, when you open up your control unit, these are going to be soldered directly to the rails. You need to unsolder these from the rails, and you want to solder these directly to the power from the control unit, because what's going to happen is after you install this box, the polarity on these rails are going to reverse. When you switch it to analog, it's going to be one polarity, and when you switch it to digital, it's going to be the opposite polarity. And you don't want your accessories, like your rechargeable wireless controllers, to get the wrong voltage or the wrong polarity of the voltage. And so you're going to want to directly connect these to the power of the control unit so they always have the correct polarity. So make sure that's one thing that you do. I used some power blocks when I built mine, so just running some wires in and then running a bunch of wires out. That's what these power blocks are. This is the analog power switch that turns the power off to both the chips. And then we've got our blue code button and our red code button, which turns off power to the opposite chips. So when pressed, the red code button will turn off the blue chip, and the blue code button will turn off the red chip. And that way you can code that button. And then you've got your LEDs, and then you've got your chips here. All of this stuff that I'm showing here is just a rehash of what I showed you in the other diagram. It's just that this is a lot cleaner diagram. This little area here is just looking at the back of the power track upside down. So this is where your control panel would be, and then these are your rails. And you can see that these rails are the opposite of these rails because this is flipped upside down. I also labeled this with what color wire that I used when I made mine. I used white, orange, green, and yellow for the wires to go from my control panel to my switch and then to my lanes. So you can use that if you want, but you can ignore those colors if they're not the same colors you're using. But this diagram is the diagram of how I've got my box set up. I hope this helps. If you guys have any questions about any of this, you're more than welcome to put a comment down below. This is a very in-depth project. I would highly recommend that you know what you're doing before you do this. One thing of note that's not anywhere in any of these things is make sure if you have lane changes that are the lane changes on the curbs, you're going to want to make sure that you remove the jumpers on those, because it will short out your chips and burn out your chips here. So make sure that all of your rails are set up so that there's no crossover. You don't want to cross over between the two, which is what happens in the curve lane changers. They have a jumper that crosses them over. Also make sure if you're using jumpers to extend the power on your track, make sure you have those going from one lane to another and that you're not crossing those over. So you need to make sure that all your lanes are independent of each other so that they're not crossing. You don't want your jumper, power jumper, to go from this lane to this lane. You could do that in digital because digital gets all the same power, but you don't want that happening in analog. So you want to make sure if it's this lane here that you jumper it to this lane on your other piece of track. Just you got to be really careful about that. Use your multimeter, check your voltages, also use an ohm meter. Make sure that all the pieces of your track all go back to the correct piece of track all the way around the track. Make sure all your lanes are isolated. It's very important. If you don't isolate your lanes, you are going to burn up these chips. Now, these chips are about $45, but you could also burn up your head unit if it got too bad. So definitely make sure that you're paying attention to where everything's connected. And, of course, as I said before, and I'm going to reiterate this again, do this at your own risk. Don't attempt this if you're worried about destroying your control unit or destroying the chips or anything, because it could happen. It could easily happen.
Okay, so that's it. I really hope this video was helpful in showing you how I did my digital to analog converter for my Carrera track. If you guys have any questions about anything I did that didn't make sense in the video or something that I may not have covered or any questions at all, please feel free to put them down in the comments. Now, I almost always answer my comments, so if you have a question, you might look down in the comments and see if somebody already asked the same question, then you should see an answer from me. But if you look down in the comments and you don't see that question, feel free to comment and I will answer it as soon as I possibly can. I will help you the best I can. Like I said, I will not be responsible for you breaking your Carrera digital track, but I will try to answer questions any I can. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see future videos like this, then go ahead and hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you'll be notified when I make a video. And I hope this was helpful. Also put down in the comments whether or not it was helpful. And until I see you guys again, happy racing.